That's tomorrow on Mornings. Well, many of us are familiar with some of the stories of Australia's stolen generation, Indigenous children taken from their mothers and fostered out. Well, imagine not only being forced to give up your baby because you are unmarried, but also being arrested and placed in a girls' home in the process. Well, our attitudes and, of course, assistance in the 60s and the 70s were vastly different than from today. Lily Arthur knows this too well because this is what happened to her. She joins me this morning. Lily, good morning.
Good morning, Kerry-Ann.
It's 1967, you're 16 years, almost 17 years of age, and you're virtually awoken in the middle of the night and arrested.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, I was asleep in bed and my boyfriend was sitting there playing his guitar, and the police walked into our home and woke me up, and after they questioned me, found out that I was pregnant and arrested me and took me to spend the night in jail at the Boggo Road Watch House.
So in the police terms, you're underage?
I was told that I was underage, but in fact I found out many years later that I wasn't underage and they had illegally arrested me.
So somebody's dobbed you in for being a pregnant 16-year-old living with a boyfriend?
Yes.
Do you know who that was?
I still to today don't know how that happened. Never find out, I don't think.
What happened then? You were eventually sent to a girls' home.
I was brought before the Children's Court and being charged with exposed to moral danger and then placed into a girls' home. I spent the next 9 months in that home.
Where were your parents?
My mother was living in Sydney at the time, and straight after my arrest, my son's father went to Sydney and got permission for us to get married. And when he came back and gave the papers to myself, I signed them. And when he came back to pick them up from the home, they refused to give them to him. So I didn't know what was happening at the time. I was kept completely, ignorant of what was going on. So I was there waiting to be told that I was going to be married for months. And the realisation that it wasn't going to happen, I think I went into a bit of a tailspin at that particular point in time because I didn't know what was going to happen to myself and to the baby.
So you're waiting in the home to give birth. You've had virtually no communication with the father of your baby, who's gone to Sydney to meet your mother. Because she's gone to Sydney with her family, your stepdad and 7 kids.
Yes.
Did your mother contact you?
My mother was contacting me through letters, but most of our mail was being read, going in and coming out. So I basically couldn't let her know what was going on. To her mind, she was that I was going to be married, and that was the end of it because she'd signed the papers and that. She didn't know what was going on. She didn't even know that I'd lost my baby. They never told her that they took the child. Not at all.
And you were there for the next 7 months?
I was there for 7 months, and then I went into labour and gave birth in Queensland, in a hospital in Queensland.
The papers for adoption, how much coercion was there to sign the adoption papers?
Well, when I went into labour, I was in labour for 16 hours. At the point of labour, I was tied down to the bed and had my face pushed into the mattress so I couldn't see my child. And they took him and hid him away from me. 8 days later, after I'd been given a regime of drugs to, I suppose, to nearly knock me out to the point of unconsciousness, they came along with a consent to basically make me consent to their criminal actions leading up to that point. They told me if I didn't sign the consent, they'd keep the baby in foster care, and then, I'd have to prove that I was fit enough to get him back, and that would take many years. So basically I signed the consent, but at the time I signed the wrong name. So I didn't even know basically what was happening at that particular point in time. But that was 8 days after I gave birth, and I hadn't seen my child up to that point. After I signed the consent, they said that I could see him for 5 minutes at the nursery window. So when I saw him at the window, they had a card on his bassinet saying not to be shown. So that was the first and the only time that I saw my son for 30 years.
And you did find your son, and how is that relationship now?
It's been a wonderful relationship, very traumatic for the both of us. And I think he finds it extremely difficult to comprehend the sort of crimes that were committed against him and myself. It's very hard for him to deal with that.
And so many of us find it so hard to imagine the pain and the anguish that you've been through for so very long. But attitudes were so different then. There was no real financial support for unwed teenage mothers. Your parents were in another state. No real communication. What do you want to happen now?
I think in light of what has happened in the past, I think that we need to have a national inquiry into past adoption practices.
So what would that prove now?
Well, it would prove that for the last 50 years, state governments right across this country were deliberately breaking their own laws. We were the sole legal guardian of our children. They introduced laws that basically stole our children at birth and basically sent us on our way, knowing full well that they had basically harmed us so much that we were going to carry an awful lot of mental health damage along with our children for many, many decades. And that needs to be addressed. And I think that a national inquiry also needs to be looking at uniform adoption laws across this country, because there are still people that can't find their children. And children
about 3,000 a year seek their children, but adoption, of course, doesn't happen in the same way now, and there are different stories. But the emotional recovery is such a tough one, Lily, and after this break, our psychologist, Ian Wallace, will join us to talk about some of the mental health issues surrounding forced adoption. Stay with us.